I've just had a wonderful time talking with Jayesh today about all things renewable. Now, Jayesh is our product manager here at Greenwood, and he deals specifically with the GridSafe, which is a secondary protection board. Actually, he's got his finger in a few pies, and we do talk about that during the podcast. He's an all-round nice guy. He's actually done installs, so he's done the hard yards on a roof. He loves his cricket, and he especially loves Indian classical dancing. What I really liked about the discussion we had is that he has some very astute observations about the renewable energy sector, what it is, where it's going, and how it can benefit from the Australian experience. In other words, what to do and what not to do. And I especially like his take on what is required to actually succeed in the renewable energy sector, whether it's in India, Australia, or around the world. I think I'd like to talk about some personal stuff. I've known you for a fairly decent length of time at Greenwood. I consider you a close friend of mine, and so this particular podcast is an absolute pleasure. How old were you when you came to Australia? How old when you first came out?
Yeah, so when I first came in Australia, it was in the year 2018, and I was just 24 years.
Wow.
At that time. And I came here to do the master's. So I did a master's of engineering management from CQ University. So that was when I came.
You mentioned education, and obviously that's really important in no matter what profession that we're involved in. What are your views? And I know we were talking about personal things. I started off, but what are your views on things like continuous professional development especially in renewable energy? Well, how important is that, do you think?
Probably when you start with the renewable industry. So at my start, I would share my experience of how I started, and probably then I'll jump to the question towards how important is it. So when I started, during that time, the CEC was the leading accreditation for renewable in Australia. So I started with the Clean Energy Council accredited course. Once the accreditation was done, I started working in the renewable industry. So once I started working in the renewable industry, I found that course was giving me the overall information of what is required. But when I started working, I was like, I need to learn more and go through so many things, because there might be different scenarios which you come across when you have a real life learning or you're working on a real project. So basically, till date, it has been around 4.5 years in the renewable industry, and still I'm learning every day.
And that's
so that continuous learning is very critical, or it is important in a renewable industry.
I agree. It's interesting. You're an electrical engineer. Actually, you've done a master's in renewable energy, but are you an electronics engineer? What's your
Yes. So my background is I did my bachelor's of electronics engineering back in India, and then I did my master's of management for engineers in Australia.
Wow.
So my background is engineering as an engineering management student.
So tell me, and for the people listening today, electronics, that's electricity. Electrical engineering, that's electricity. What's the difference there? And was it hard to translate move from one to the other, or was it pretty easy? What is the difference? Yeah.
So I think when we consider the electrical engineering, it's more of the high voltage and low voltage stuff. Whereas when we consider the electronics engineering, those are micro parts. For example, you can say more of a control related engineering.
Okay. So you're talking, it's just scaling down. It's still, current and voltage and all of those things, but it's more on a micro level.
Micro level.
Yeah. In a way, would that there may be some advantages going from electronic to electrical because you of that precision involved. Is that would that be a fair statement? You think, or am I just talking rubbish?
Nah, I think so. There is that involvement, and in my current role, I'm not completely going from electronics to electrical, but my current role includes electronic as well as electrical. In that case, when I work for the network protection board, it includes electronics as well as the electrical part.
That's a good point, and we'll talk about the GridSafe later on. What I wanted to ask you too is that you're one of those rare engineers who actually has actually done some hard work on a roof. So can you tell us a little bit about the early days of doing solar installations? Yeah, because we both know how hard it is, and
Yeah.
I want to hear your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So after I finished my studies, masters, uh, I struggled to find work for around 2 to 3 months, and then one day an opportunity hit up. There was a project engineer role, but they wanted someone who can work as a trade assistant as well,
Wow.
because this business was not that large. So it was a small business. So they wanted the person who joins as a project engineer who can design as well as assist them in a trade. So I started as a project engineer slash trade assistant. So
Wow, that's an interesting combination.
yeah. So
Wow.
at the initial stage, I was climbing on the roof, putting all the rails, laying down the panels, but putting the conduit and everything. But we were not allowed to touch the electrical part, like the cables and everything. So that was something restricted. But when I started with doing that part, it increased my interest in renewable industry. And I thought, oh, I can't touch the cable, but I can design a system where I can run the cable and tell someone to run the cable, or do the single line diagram where the cable calculations and everything which can be done by myself. So I started researching what can be done. Based on my bachelor's of engineering degree, I was able to do the Clean Energy Council accredited course. So I started doing that course, and during that time, when I did the course, it was more of in-person course. So during that time, in the 5 day of course, there was couple of days where they allowed us to work on the complete setup, where you get to touch the cables as well under the monitoring, or because they had a full setup developed during that course. And it was like the people who are doing the designing course can also join the installer doing that setup completely. So at that time I got the privilege to do the installation as well. So getting to know how hard is to install a solar system for an installer in that perspective.
Do you think, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think it's advantageous for a designer, whether they're or a project manager, to actually have done the hard work? Because surely it would help. Like if you're designing something and you actually haven't installed it, surely it would help that you have installed it before. That would help with the design process, wouldn't it? The
Yeah,
practical side, yeah.
yeah, in the practical side, definitely that would help. Like, I'll take you to the background of why it helps. Probably when I used to do a trade assistant work, I found that we designed a system where a residential system where we had the 6 panels in the north roof, and we had around 6 panels in the west roof. And it was a tile roof. We started opening the tiles, and we found that there were no beams where we can support our railing system. And at that time, we were required to change the design. We had only 4 panels or 5 panels in the north roof from my memory, whereas we need to move the other panels to the west roof. But luckily we had enough space in the west roof where we can install those panels. So basically from this I can say that definitely it helps when you have an hand-on experience on roof, because if I would have not gone through that situation at that time, I won't know the importance of installation or how the designing and everything works from my end.
It's a really interesting point. That I want to jump back to the personal side of you. Sorry, I phrased that really badly. I want to talk about your early life, but one question that stands out is, like, you studied in India. You knew you wanted to be involved. You wanted to be an engineer, electrical. You wanted to be an engineer. What made you to say, look, I'm not going to pursue a career in India. I'm going to go overseas, Australia, and pursue a career there. What was the trigger for that?
Okay. When I was in my fourth year of engineering, I started researching of the master's degree. And probably I found out that Masters of Engineering Management was something which interested me, then MBA. And then I started looking for the country because there was no course during that time which was suitable for me for Masters of Engineering Management back in India. So I probably started researching for the courses, and I went across the countries like USA where they had a Masters of Engineering Management, but there was no internship provided, or there was other things like I can't get a permanent residency there. Probably after doing my masters, I wanted work experience there, so probably I skipped US, then Canada. In Canada, I was not able to get the masters, but I was able to get the post graduation diploma. But when we think about that, when I thought about it, I thought if I need to come back to India, I would the degree with the postgraduate diploma won't work in India because it's not a master's, probably. Then I researched about Australia, and I found that there is a master's of engineering management in Australia where you get the master's. And also, additionally, I was looking for an internship in a course. So I found a perfect course at CQ University, which had Masters of Management for Engineers
Perfect.
and which had an internship included in that course. So the structure matched the best.
How important do you think the internship is when for anyone studying, especially engineering? Is it? Yeah. How was it for you?
Yeah, I find it very important as well as very helpful because when I consider my case, I came overseas to work, to study, and then finding a work would be difficult if I had not had the local experience in our field. So probably a university helped us to find an internship. So they had a coordination with one of the company which helps us to get the internship. So I was lucky to get that opportunity, and I had done the internship as a process engineer.
And what? Tell us some of your day-to-day activities as an intern at that company.
So I was placed as an intern process engineer at Wellenius Williamson, where basically it was more of logistic company, but they used to have this production line for Mercedes Benz during that time. So probably in the early phase, I was given an Excel record of some of the parts and everything, but then I figured out those things early. So my manager gave me an additional task for the parts management and everything for how the process works and clearing out the process. So I think my internship was for 3 months, and in about 2 months, I had all those things up to date in my record. So now the manager was like, how could I help him develop more skills? So probably he placed me with another manager who was preparing a standard operating procedure and for one of the process. And by doing that, eh, the other manager told me like you can go through this standard operating procedure, and there is one staff who is working through this procedure, so you can observe as well as write a standard operating procedure. So that At that point, I got a chance to observe how the process works, as well as adding up the points of standard operating procedure for that process.
That would have been really interesting. And that was a fairly big responsibility too, isn't it, for an intern?
Yeah, fairly bit, but they gave a good credit or reward on their end. Like when my university reached out to that company, Wellinius Williamson company, they gave a good feedback, and probably they mentioned that I was the best intern they ever had, and
I'm not surprised. I work with you. I know what you like.
and yeah,
That's right.
and my university shared that comments from the company where I was intern, and you feel very lucky when you see that.
That's great. At what stage, were you a little when you were a little kid? And we have talked about this off camera. You were naughty. You were a naughty kid. You weren't the best student. You were running around. You were being a boy, climbing trees, doing what you do. At what stage did you say to yourself, I'd like to do engineering? When did it actually happen for you? What stage?
Okay. After my 10th grade, I was like, as you mentioned, that I was not into study more and I was naughty. I thought, I'll go with the commerce. But my mom knew that because I was been saying to her that I want to do science and engineering. And like when I selected commerce after 10th, my mom was like, nah, you wanted to do science. Don't worry about your marks or grade. She just pushed me like, if you want to do science or engineering, go for it. You will make it. And she helped me to decide that pathway. When I was like jumping from other way, she pushed me to do engineering because that was what I wanted to.
Have you always had like an analytical kind of brain? Is that your brain, like analyzing things and problem solving?
Yes, probably that was the case. She might have pushed me to get into that engineering firm or more of science.
Yeah, because your mother knows. Mothers know these things, and that's a common thing with most engineers I've spoken to. They have this particular very analytical brain, and they can drill down and get very granular as well. And what was it like growing up, in India? Like, did you have was it a happy childhood? Did you have a lot of freedom? What was it like?
Okay. I was like, we were five siblings, and I was the youngest amongst the all.
Spoiled brat. That's what. Sorry.
Yeah, so life went up and down. Like, yeah, I had privilege to get whatever I wanted. Like, probably until 12, 12 years, and after that we had one incident in our family. We lost my father, and during that time my elderest brother was somewhere around maybe 19 or 20, so it was a bit of a hard time for the family. Then what happened was, overall I was the youngest, so I didn't suffer the most, but the my mom as well as my elder brother, they suffered a bit more. But my mom started running her own business. My elder brother started working on the pathway of where my father used to work, and then my sister supported our family. So probably we got stability in next 2 to 3 years of time, but they never let me felt like I am missing something. Like my elder brother was always my best friend before my father's death, but after that he was my father, guiding me through all the ways.
It sounds like your family is, apart from being pretty incredible, are very, very close.
Yes, we five brothers and sisters are very very close from each other, and like till date, if anyone has an issue or problem, there will be four standing for the fifth one.
that's
And that's the
that's really good. And you obviously visit India at least once a year. How important it is to maintain, because it seems like you've chosen Australia to live in, and we had a conversation off camera about this, but how important it is to actually reconnect regularly with blood, with your blood family.
yeah. I think it is very important to do that. In saying that, like, when you visit, because I'm the only kid who is overseas from five, all the others are based in Mumbai, India. So what happens is, when you reach Mumbai, probably for me, when I reach Mumbai, it's like a festival because all your sisters and brothers are at your place to see you, and we have around eight sibling next generation, like
Wow.
my brothers and sisters, like has son and daughter, and I think there are eight kids in the family in our next generation. So probably all of them gathers, and we like around 15 to 20 people in a home, and it's like a festival for us when I go there.
Do you spoil your nieces and nephews when you go over?
Definitely. That's why they
Good.
wait for me.
That's really lovely. I love that.
Yeah.
So and you would get homesick a little bit, wouldn't you? How do you combat the homesickness? What's the best thing you can do if you're feeling homesick about India? What's the best thing you can do?
Okay. Uh, Homesickness was a bit more when I first came to Australia in my first or second year in Australia, like 2019 and 20. But luckily, we had this video call thing or the telephone where we can call on video. So I used to call my family constantly for on video calls when I'm homesick. Or in later stage, after 2 to 3 years, I found a way out to how I can not feel homesick was by going to a cafe, things which I like a coffee or almond croissant, which I never had in India.
Okay, on that note, what is the one food that well, maybe you can't get in Australia. Maybe you can get in Australia, but it's not as good. But what's that one home, the comfort food that you miss from India? Is there a particular dish?
So probably there are many, but
Oh, many.
one of the
I
most
love
is
it.
like mendu vada. It's similar to the donut over here, but here the donut is sweet. The mendu vada is not that sweet, so I miss that food. Back
It's
home.
like a doughy. It's like a donut with doughy.
Yeah.
What about is it forgive my pronunciation, garam? The round balls of uh, uh, pastry soaked in like a honey water. Jayesh is looking at me like, "What are you on? What are you on about?" Okay, well, forget that one. Now we've covered your education background, and what did you know about the renewable energy scene in Australia before your first job on the roof and project managing? Did you like you gone to uni in India, you gone to uni in Australia, you gone to uni for a lot of time. Did you sort of when you got to Australia have an understanding of the renewable energy climate here, or was it completely foreign to you
Uh,
until you started working? That is,
yeah, I think so. It was completely different for me, uh, unless I started working on that part.
Yeah, right. Now, is there any was there a mentor, anyone that in your early years, both in India and or Australia, that had a really big impact on you, like when you first came out, or apart from your family who sound amazing, and your brother, obviously your brother is very special because he is your brother and your best friend, and also acted like as a father later on. But is there anyone else outside the family that you really, learnt a lot from in India, and in the early days in Australia, where had a big impact on your life? Yeah.
Yes. To answer this question, if I say one, it would be not fair for that because I had many mentors in different stage of my life. Like you already mentioned, my family that was the key mentor for what I am today. Other than that, when I was in India doing my bachelor's of engineering, there was someone named Mukesh Patel. He was head of software in the Z channel, the news agency. So he used to guide me during that stage. Then when I came to Australia, I used to work in IGA supermarket. So we had one customer named Craig. He had a pretty good experience, but he was retired. At, but when I spoke to him about how to get into professional job in Australia after completing my masters, and he used to help me with building up the resume, like he used to help me with the points and everything. So Craig helped me during that stage. After my masters, I joined the as a project engineer and the trade assistant role. During that time, uh, that was based on the personal contact with someone named Manoj, and he helped me with that part. After that, I met you, Valley,
Oh,
at
stop it.
Greenwood Solutions, and basically from day one, it felt like we will be having a good connection because you made those conversations comfortable and you like helped me learn more as we both were learning at some stage
Absolutely.
together.
Absolutely.
So, and also you helped me push myself for training as well as the other work which I do, and you helped me when I was demotivated thing. And
Vice versa, actually. It's funny, yeah, because over the last few years, I've learnt so much, not only the nitty gritty about what goes on grid protection boards and large commercial solar projects, but also attention to detail and processes and procedures, something that doesn't come naturally to me, and it comes naturally to some people. So my hat off. Yeah, but you're embarrassing me now, you bastard. That's
and
no, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's really important though, isn't it, to you know, to have someone or if you're lucky, a few people who have this a good impact on your life. And I always go back to like there's a couple of teachers I had in high school, which I went. Not only were they good teachers, but they were damn good people who actually said things that still resonate now and
yes,
set you on a path. And it's you're lucky if you come across those people.
yes.
Basically,
And after that, we also had Tom at Greenwood,
absolutely, yeah,
genius, and
yeah,
he used
absolute
to help
genius.
us
Yes,
with our
yes,
progressive, like where we should progress in next 2 years 3 years of time, and he used to help us build our independent development plans and showing
absolutely.
us the path where we should be. And above those, our director, Eddie Greco,
Oh.
who helps us like learn new things in development.
Close your ears, Eddie.
Yeah,
No,
because he being from the renewable engineer or graduate, it was Eddie who gave us opportunities to jump on the higher level.
no.
Also, Anth, who is head of engineers at Greenwood at present, he is showing us like how we deal with the difficult situations. So I can't forget mentioning him as well in this one.
It's really important, isn't it? As you know, mentioned before, it doesn't matter what you're involved in, to have these mentors and to have these opportunities to learn. And I think, and we talked about training before. Like, what advice would you give someone who's in India, who's one of the 200,000 electrical engineers who want to come to Australia? Have you got any advice concerning the best approach to gaining a foothold in this country from the perspective of looking to get in this industry? In other words, you would have learnt what not to do and what to do. Have you got any advice in that
Uh,
respect?
yes, if someone is looking for entering this space of renewable industry, they should start learning first with the softwares which are used for renewable, because considering, I'll give the examples of two softwares like HelioScope or PVSyst. So whichever place around the world you go, that software remains the same.
Doesn't matter what language you speak, they use
Yes,
the software. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So starting with those software, probably then jumping to the next part is more of structural designing or electrical design. So there are a couple of softwares which helps on that stage, which we use on in our day to day. AutoCAD and Revit. Or AutoCAD we use it more frequent because we that's the software to go for us. So probably start learning those software, because learning those software will give you more exposure to any part of the world you go. You should know those software for entering into renewable industry. And third would be more of, for example, if someone is considering to come to Australia, going through the rules and regulations of solar or PV system or renewable sector in Australia, probably that would help them
You're
for
talking
the
about
start.
the Australian electrical
Yeah,
standards, yeah.
Australian electrical standards. And if they are planning to come into Australia, then the fourth stage would be going through the accreditation process, which basically was done by me as well, using my bachelor's of electronics engineering degree. So I got to do that accredited course based on my bachelor's degree. So, and I don't think so it would be not possible for someone to do it remotely as well, because these days the trainings are available online as well for that.
You mentioned four programs, and let me go. So HelioScope, PVSyst, AutoCAD, but I didn't quite catch the fourth one you mentioned.
So
What's that for?
the fourth one was the Revit, REVIT, Revit software.
I don't know that.
Okay, so it's similar to AutoCAD, which can help in designing
so
part.
computer-assisted drafting program, but it's not AutoCAD. Does it have any advantages over AutoCAD at all?
No, I think so it would be similar. So probably starting with the AutoCAD would be helpful, because I haven't gone through the Revit completely, but I have been using AutoCAD from last 3 to 4 years.
It seems that in the electrical side of things, there's not much use for a program, say, like SolidWorks, which is more 3D. Is it true that we are operating more in a 3D environment most of the time, like with doing SLDs and things like that, single line diagrams? Or because I don't really hear much talk of SolidWorks at Greenwood.
Yeah, because when we consider the design of the aerial layout or the single line diagram for at the start, it is more likely 2D than 3D.
Yep.
So basically, as because you mentioned about what someone should start with, so starting with the 2D would be helpful, then jumping to the 3D, going to the harder part first.
Yep, walk before you can run.
Yeah.
As we always say.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. You should say that. And what about, like, I mean, you've had to navigate the permanent residency, visas, all of that stuff. What advice would you have for that side? Forget about the renewable energy. Forget about being an electrical engineer. Just even coming to Australia right now, it seems it's a lot harder than it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. Have you got any advice for anyone, any specific advice there? Should they get a good immigration agent, or what should they do? Yes.
Okay. So to start with the visa process, I think it has been a bit harder than 15 years to come to Australia and get the permanent residency. Probably I got mine last year, but the process is, you start working on your application or gathering the documents when you finish your master's degree or whatever studies you are doing. Probably I also visited a couple of immigration lawyers as well as the immigration agents, but it's good if you do your own homework by research, because there might be different path which your lawyer or the immigration agent might have not told you. So probably when I started with my process, I used to visit lawyers as well as immigration agent, but I used to do all the research work from my end as well, and probably keeping all the documents up to date, and start gathering as soon as you know, okay, this is required. I used to prepare the document, send it to the like I had my immigration lawyer, because I didn't want it to mess up my own file. So probably I used to gather all the information and documents and everything, but the immigration lawyer used to help me with the visa application process. So probably to sum up, I would say start the process, research about it, go to the immigration lawyer or immigration agent if you don't want to do it by yourself. Go to them. What are the documents required by them? make sure you also research by yourself if those documents are what are required or if any additional information is required.
Is it an expensive process?
Yes and no.
Tell me the no first.
Okay. No, because you are going to be part of some another country. You are getting the permanent residency. So probably if you pay for it, it's worth it because you get the facilities which, like, considering Australia, you get a Medicare. Even though you pay for it, but it's like you are paying for those services.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and the thing is, if you'd obviously if you didn't have the money to do this, you probably wouldn't do it. But if you intend to, you save your money and you do what you need to do to get there, isn't it? At the end of the day,
Yes.
Human beings are resilient, aren't they?
Yeah. So that's why it was yes and no. Now the yes is because during that time when we used to do our application part, we were like in the low paying jobs, or it was very hard to gather the money during that time. So that was yes, because at that time that amount looked very big because it was very hard to reach to that amount savings.
No, it's all relative, isn't it? What is some of the Australian slang that you have a hard time getting, or have had a hard time getting your head around? Like in the early days when you were hearing that, because there's a lot of swearing that goes on solar installation sites, a lot of building sites. So was there any slang that you went, I don't know what they're talking about,
Yeah, at the start when I used to work at supermarket, whenever you ask someone, how are you? And they're like, not bad. That's not a slang, but it's like you are not used to because in the place where I came from, like I'm Gujarati. So when we ask someone, Kem cho, they used to say Majama, which is good. But coming to Australia, and it's like not bad.
It is really weird. Like, how you going? Not bad. Oh, are you sure you're okay? Yeah, can't complain. It's all negative. Yeah, it's like, yeah, oh, whatever. And what about some of the words? Because Australians are notorious for not really opening their mouths very wide, whereas it's much easier to learn American English because they open their mouth wide,
Yeah.
whereas Australians can go, hey, yeah, all right, their mouths hardly
Yeah.
move. Was that a problem with certain words? But your English was pretty good already before you came, wasn't it?
Yes, and at the start, some of the words felt bit like, what is saying? Like arvo, servo, like because there was a construction work going near where I used to work, and they're like, see you at this hour, and I was like, when he is going to see me now? And then I start looking at it. It's afternoon.
It's such a neutral sounding language, and as a result, it is harder. It is the hardest English to learn because it is that neutral and the lack of mouth opening and stuff like that. Now, obviously, there's a big cost of living difference between India and Australia, and is that something that hit you pretty hard when you first came out, like from India? Because you're coming out, you're a student, you don't have that much money, and you're suddenly going, oh, what?
Yes. So, in saying that, at the start, 3 4 months, it felt like it is hard to live in Australia when you don't have a part time job. So, probably when I came on student visa, we were given a work rights of 20 hours a week, which can be worked. So, when I started my first job, after that, I found that living expense is not that difficult in Australia because we started working as a part time for 20 hours, which helps you to pay for your day to day living. So you are not asking for or taking money from your family, which gives you more comfortness. So after once I started working part time, I didn't felt like the living expense is bit more, yeah.
It makes sense. It does. And plus, obviously, you're the kind of person who didn't want to, I'll use the Australian term, sponge off their parents when, a lot of students, international students come over and they do get a lot of help financially from their parents. And in some cases, they don't need to work or they won't work because they're getting this money coming through. But I think it's really important that you can stand on your own 2 feet, because at the end of the day, we're adults, and that's probably a conversation for another podcast. Too deep and meaningful there. Now, I think I would really like to talk about the solar in India, and we talked about it right at the start. I should have talked about it right now because I've come back to it. But this whole it seems like massive growth opportunity in India. It's huge. You got 1.4 billion population, huge land mass, people everywhere. As you said, 300 sun days a year, 40% more than in Germany. What's your understanding of the whole Indian solar landscape? A very broad question there to start off with. Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about the renewable in India, probably there is a significant growth and transformation in the year of 2025 in the renewable industry. And if you see the stats, India is the 4th largest globally for a producer of the renewable energy at present. So probably
they're 4th largest, really?
Yeah, 4th largest globally. So probably we see more of the opportunities in India at present.
You were saying before, and there was a podcast we both had a bit of a look at, and you were saying that the particular person was doing a lot of domestic work, and they were doing a heck of a lot of installs. But as you said, you'd probably need 10, 15, 20, 40 of these companies to actually satisfy the demand. What do you think is going to happen when India further follows that electrification? In other words, EVs, charging EVs. That's going to put such a massive strain on the infrastructure, and the power requirements are just going to go up. Not to mention AI and data centers. What's your view there?
I think so. If people start putting more of PV batteries or EV, I think they are using the electricity generated by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it won't put more of the pressure on the grid at that time if they start producing their power, storing their power, and using their own power for EV. So I think there would be some or the other way where the grid would be stabilized in that situation.
So do you think that from the perspective of the Indian experience, that there'll be it's purely subjective, just purely your opinion, that they will go towards a higher percentage of situations with battery storage than, say, in Australia?
Probably they might go or they might not go based on their target. Basically, India has a target of installation of around 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by the year of 2030. So in that, they might have the battery storage, which helps more stabilization of the grid, or they might not, but it's not sure yet.
So has that been a problem traditionally within the Indian grid, the instability, lots of blackouts and brownouts as compared to, say, the Australian grid?
So yes, there has been sometimes. Probably I'll give you an example of how this has been mitigated by the local public, because two of my sisters live in a place where there is usually a blackout kind of a situation where the light goes away for a couple of hours only. But probably they have their own small inverter as well as battery at home, which they use for their essential services when there is a blackout. So probably they do the mitigation of their blackout by themselves at present.
So you'd say that there's a few little UPS kind of systems that people have because they're used to these blackouts and brownouts. That's really interesting. So people are already accustomed to blackouts and brownouts. They've implemented strategies to combat them already. So interestingly enough, they already know batteries and things like that, and backup systems more so than probably in Australia, where we have less blackouts and brownouts.
Yes, because in saying that, I mentioned about the batteries at my sister's place. Probably this happened to me when I was working from her place in 2019 when I visited India. And not 2019, sorry, it was in 2021. And there was a blackout kind of situation, like there was no electricity. And after 10 or 15 seconds, the electricity came back, like the fan started rotating, or light was there. And I asked my sister, oh, how did this happen? And she was like, oh, now we have a inverter and a battery at our place, a small battery and an inverter which runs all the essential services.
Wow, so it wasn't technically UPS because that's uninterruptible. This was more like a backup that required, 10 to 15 seconds to flick over.
Yeah.
I know. What about in India, generators? Now, generators are all over the world. The bigger the application, the bigger the generator, more likely it's going to be diesel. Is there much diesel Is there much use of generators in India?
Yes, I have seen a lot of use of a diesel generator in India. More of this you see when there is a festival.
Oh, yeah.
Like if the people want to place a remote music system, they use this diesel generator. So we have more of diesel generator vans or trucks, you say, for a big music system.
Yeah, wow.
As well.
Where does India have its own, and I don't know this, its own petrol reserves, or do they import fuel from other countries?
Yeah, I also don't know much about this.
Yeah.
But from my understanding, they do not have their own resource of petroleum. They do import the petroleum.
Yeah, okay. So that's all the more reason for them to hurry up this full transition to renewables. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, not only from an environmental and a cost perspective, but the fact that they don't have, say, access to that fossil fuel in their own country. It's really interesting. Now, solar panels. You mentioned off camera that there's actually one or two, I think maybe two manufacturers of solar panels in India. Do you know anything about the companies and what kind of panels they're producing? Like, is it? Yeah.
I do not have that detail of what size of panels or how they are manufacturing, but I know the company's name. Those are Vari Solar and the Goldie Solar. That came back in my mind when you asked this question again.
Right. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and I think so. Those two are the leading, because whenever I go to the airport, or like Mumbai airport or Delhi airport, when I'm visiting India, you would find all the trolleys where the Goldie Solar or Vari Solar has been advertised there.
Okay, but I suppose the majority of the panels come. Oh well, I shouldn't say that. I'll ask the question: are the majority of the panels coming in, like everywhere else, from China, or is the local manufacturers able to provide enough panels for those projects in India?
Okay, when I was looking for the information of how the panels are being supplied to India, we found that around 80 to 90% of the panels were coming from China or overseas
Yep.
for the current requirements. But there is a big push by the government to do the manufacturing in house, because they have already run the campaign of Made in India thing. So they are pushing it harder to do the more production in India.
Do they have the infrastructure? Like, I don't know much about Indian manufacturing, the existing Indian manufacturing, but do they have the infrastructure already there to start production of panels, or?
I doubt there might be, or else if there was already what we say if they already had the capacity to do it, they would rather push on doing it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I heard somewhere like it was hard to beat the manufacturing thing of China. Like it is cheaper
Yeah.
than the production cost of panels in India.
This is the thing. It all comes down to those economies of scale and the cost of the goods sold. What about other renewables? I assume in certain more mountainous regions of India there'd be a bit of hydropower, and also in the windy regions, any wind power. I know there'd be hydropower.
Yes, if I have not gone across the hydropower more often, but I have been following for the wind energy.
Oh, wind,
And yeah, because I think I remember I sent you the picture when I visited my native place
Yeah, you
of a
did.
of
Yeah.
a wind farm.
That's right. I remember that now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think there are heaps of wind farm in India. Probably, I think around 50 gigawatts or plus. They have the wind farm capacity there.
The at the moment, like in Australia, there's a big push to actually develop systems which communicate between all the inputs, whether they're wind, solar, hydro, and incorporate the battery and the inverters. What would you say to renewable energy or electrical engineers now in India concerning training in that area, like, you know, the comms side of things, how important it is? What would be your sort of take on that?
Probably, as an engineer, that would be the aim or target to reach, to know how the comms or how this system works. Because probably as the more and more PV systems are being installed, there would be a congestion in grid. So during that stage, there would be more of rules and regulations of how this congestion can be managed, and at that time, more of control comes in place. So more of control systems will be the go ahead would be more of control system than installation of just a PV system, which is like currently when I researched, I found that there is no protection or any additional components required during the installation of a PV system. But in future, there will be a protection required and the control monitoring of those systems.
What about secondary protection? Is there a requirement for Indian commercial solar systems? I'm not talking about domestic, of course, but is there a requirement for them to have any secondary protection? And I'm sorry, there has been a name change on that. I can't remember. I did the interface control, I think it might be called in the new standard. I can't remember. And I did the test only a few weeks ago. No comment. Now, is there any requirement in India for secondary protection?
Yes, there is a secondary protection requirement in India, but not similar to Australia, where we require the central protection over 200 kVA. In India, we require the central protection relay for any system which is grid connected over 1 megawatt or the transmission line is over 11 kVA.
So there. Now let's get and this is something I should have asked earlier. Now a lot of countries have all sorts of different voltages. As I said, America's 110 volt, etc. But India does follow almost exactly our same system: 400 volts nominal, three phase, etc., etc. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So it's almost similar to what's it's in Australia.
So that means it must be easier for someone from India who studied electronic or electrical engineer to actually come into the Australian climate because the voltages are the same.
Yeah, we can say that would be a bit more easier to understand on that perspective. But there are differences in culture as well as regulations in India and Australia.
And on that, you mentioned before about the standards and how important it is to learn them and as part of a continuous professional development. And then really a lot of what we're talking about comes back to training And obviously here at Greenwood, we have Greenwood Academy where we're developing online training for all manner of people involved in renewable energy. And it is incredibly important to not only maintain a certain level of expertise in this area, but to learn more things, because the climate's changing so absolutely so radically. I mean, a year or 2-3 years ago, I would have never have even known of the term FCAS or arbitrage, and now people are talking about that all the time.
Yeah, I think so. That's important, that part.
Yeah, so that wasn't really a question, was it? Sorry.
So it was the answer more than a question.
Yeah, it was. Now, I've got some notes here, so I'm cheating a little bit. The Modi government offers up to 78,000 crore.
70,000 rupees.
Oh, it's rupees in direct subsidy for rooftop solar with an efficient 30-day processing. Now, do you know off the top of your head what proportion of that is the cost of a solar system? A small. You wouldn't know, would you? No, it's too hard.
No, I think so.
Oh, really?
I know about it.
Yeah.
So that subsidy is for the rooftop solar, more of residential solar.
Mm-hmm.
And in the start, when I mentioned about it is 60-40.
Yep.
So 60% of the installation cost goes to the customer, whereas the 40% is paid by the government, and that 40% amount is that 78,000 rupees which you just mentioned.
Okay. And they're talking about a 3 or 4 year payback, and obviously that comes with some caveats because it just depends. It assumes probably a certain level of consumption, because as we know, solar only, if you're not working at home, is less advantageous than, say, if you are working from home or solar combined with a battery system. And it's all about, because solar doesn't produce during the night time. It's all about that consumption load profile mixture. Now,
yeah. So when you mentioned about 3 to 4 years of payback period,
mm-hmm.
so it's probably more of in the cities where the electricity is used more during a daytime. So that payback period is for some of the states where the electricity prices are high. So probably it might take around 5 to 6 years in average all over the India to pay back.
Look, it's a funny one, isn't it? We've talked about this before, over the last few years about the different drivers for the purchase of solar. Domestic can include environmental concerns, etc., whereas when it comes to business, it's more about the bottom line. A business has options to spend their money wherever, and it's the job of the commercial solar salesperson to point out that solar is the best option, but it's a purely financial decision. And in regards to the domestic side of things, is the average Indian household, do they have an environmental concern, or is it more about the money, about saving money?
I think it's a bit of both. But again, you can weigh it more of 60-40.
Yeah.
It's 40% of environment, whereas 60% of money.
I totally understand. It's just it's the age old thing about why people are actually doing anything at all. I remember years ago, a lot of people said, "Oh, I want to go off grid," but you say, "Well, you're on the grid." "Oh, but I want to go off grid," and then you give them the price for them to potentially go off the grid, and they go, "No, I don't want to go off the grid anymore," because that financial reality just squashes that initial desire to go off the grid. Now, India needs a lot of companies to meet this rapid growing demand. And what's solar square? What does that mean? What's solar square in India? Indian renewables.
So when you mention about the solar square, so I think that company started in 2017 or 19, and they are doing more of residential solar installation. And I think Solar Square is one of the leading residential installation company in India.
Mm.
So that refers to Solar Square.
Okay, so they're fairly well known, but in the research it says that really they'd need at least 50 to 60 of these kinds of companies. Now, it's funny, like we're talking about subsidies, and I started in solar in the early 2000s, and then around about 2008, 2009, roundabout, we had a Liberal government, John Howard, and they brought in this rebate of $8,000. And funnily enough, there was people who were getting these 1 kilowatt systems, and if the panels were really, really cheap, they were actually getting paid to put a system on because the cost of the materials and the installation was less than $8,000 in a lot of cases. And back then we had a feed-in tariff of 66 cents. So everyone was trying not to use power during the day and put everything back into the grid. And now it's completely different. The feed-in tariff is virtually zero. It's funny how these things really change people's behaviour. Do you think, what's your view of this? And it doesn't really matter about India and Australia at all. This can apply anywhere. Do you think people, once they get solar, actually start to consume more energy because they've got solar?
I probably think that won't be a case, because I think people during a sun hour, they can do as much as activity they can do, but in some cases it might differ as well. For example, if you are in Australia during winter, probably if you are not used to that cold, you will start using more of the heating thing. Whereas in India, if it is summer and if you have a solar at your place, you will start using more of air conditioner.
Yep.
So you will provide more services to yourself basically, and during that time you will use more power than the which we were usually doing, because in your mind, top of your mind, it would be like, I have a solar, so I can use more power now.
An interesting area, slightly controversial, but I'll mention, is the fact that if more people start using air conditioners, and let's say it's all powered by solar, not drawn from the grid, what you'll actually end up is hotter cities because of the output, the energy that's not being converted, the heat that comes off these units will suddenly increase the ambient temperature. Yeah. If you've got another 100,000 air conditioners pumping out, this can actually contribute to climate change. So it's a bit of a funny one, because you can't ask people to compromise their level of thermal comfort too much.
Yeah,
I mean, if suddenly someone in India has got solar and now they can run the air conditioner 7 hours a day as opposed to maybe 1 or 2 because it was so expensive, you can't tell them, oh no, don't run the air conditioner when it's 45 degrees outside.
Yeah, and that's what you will observe in some of the places in India, like when there are hot days. If the temperature is 40, then too you will feel like more because of the more of the air conditioner running in the city.
Yep.
Yeah. So when you, for example, if you are at home, you'll feel, it's all right. But when you go downstairs on the street, on a hot days, you will feel more of the heat because of the more air cons being used.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's something that people have to think about. But again, it comes down to that perceived level of thermal comfort and how much you're willing to compromise on that. Now, we have not talked about your actual role now at Greenwood. What is your official role at Greenwood? What would be a title if we could give you the title? Well, what is your title? Yes.
Okay. So at Greenwood, my current position is as a product manager for GridSafe, as well as a senior renewable energy engineer. So I have a dual role here at Greenwood. Probably more of working as a product manager at Greenwood.
So tell me what is, I know what it is, but I'm going to, for our listeners, what is the GridSafe? What is it?
So GridSafe is basically a secondary protection which is required in additional to the protection which is provided by the inverter manufacturer. Basically, it helps us helps to protect the grid when there is unstable voltage or frequency. It turns off the PV system.
So it's really a requirement from the distribution network service provider, isn't it?
Yes, you can say that, and it was out from March 2017, according to the new standards of 4777. The secondary network protection was mandatory for any systems over 30 kVA.
Because the DNSPs have their infrastructure, they want to protect it, they want the system to be safe, and that's why they've got these in place. And recently there was a change, though, wasn't there? A little bit of a fairly big change, actually, yeah. Can you explain that?
Yes, and recently, according to the new standard of 4777, the NSP has changed the mandatory requirement of secondary protection relay from 30 kVA to any system of above 200 kVA would require a secondary protection relay.
I'm going to correct you slightly there, because you'll laugh, because you already used to say it to me. It was over 30 kVA, not 30 kVA, but over 30 kVA, and now it's not 200 kVA, it's over 200 kVA. Well, you said over 200, but the 30. It was a funny one, because we used to have a lot of conversations about is it 30 or is it over 30? So that it's interesting, isn't it? Because when these changes come in, the companies have to change their design brief, don't they, for projects which previously may have required a secondary protection, and now it doesn't. But let's face it, you still have to have an enclosure. The only thing different is that it doesn't require that relay if it's under 200, under 200 kVA.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Like if the site has the generator at site, the another generator at site, then you still require a motorized breaker or a contactor to trip off the PV system.
Yep.
Or if you have a system where more than 2 inverters are required, even if the system is below 200 kVA, you need a combiner box or a DB, like you can say intermediate DB, to connect it to the main switchboard or whichever connection point you have in the available site.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. For those out there who think that there's no requirement for enclosure, they're wrong. There's still a requirement for a type test enclosure, except it won't have a relay inside it. It's so you've been involved with the GridSafe for a very long time. In fact, when you took it over, you turned it around. It wasn't doing that well, and then you basically turned into a powerhouse. And I am praising you because you deserve it. You really do. You would have seen a lot of other people's designs, because when they submit the requirement for a GridSafe, they tell you all what inverters they're using and what have you. So what are what's the most popular inverter used in the last 3 or 4 years that you've been around in these designs?
Okay, I would say, like, I have seen most of the time Sungrow CX110 inverter used for many of the jobs, and I think that was the dominating inverter from last 3 years which I have seen with this, because they would have the Sungrow 110 kVA inverter, Sungrow logger, Sungrow energy meter as a complete pack in that system size.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the early days before that, with, say, the commercial jobs of, say, up to 100 kVA, we saw a lot of the 3 times Eco 27 or the 4 times Eco 25. And that combination has dropped off quite radically. And you're getting it replaced by the 110 kVA. And funnily enough, back then, you used to have a high DC to AC ratio over 1, and now you're seeing it under 1, because a lot of people are doing systems up to 99 kilowatt, but using 110 kVA sun grow because it has 9 maximum power point trackers. And if you can't design a system with 9, don't bother designing solar systems is what I always say.
Yeah, and also due to the STC reason, they might keep it to 99.9.
That's exactly right. But it's just interesting how regulations dictate and determine design. What makes a product manager in engineering different in renewable energy, different from, say, any other industry? Like, is there anything, like if you were a project manager for, say, Mercedes and, developing a Mercedes, a new Mercedes hybrid, let's say, what would there be any real difference between your roles? And I'm not talking about the details, but your specific roles as being a product manager for this product, for the GridSafe?
I think when we talk about the overall management of the product, the role will remain, the scenario will remain the same, even if I'm working as a product manager at Mercedes or for the GridSafe. But when we go into more detail, it would be like the steps and the processes which are included would be different in that stage.
You, as part of your job, you spend a lot of time liaising with clients. And would you say that having good people skills is a prerequisite for this job? Like, because, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The good communication is the key for this role, because what happens is, as you are a product manager, which is for the product based on engineering, there might be a people who might have less or no knowledge about what exactly is required or the product is required or the rules or regulation. So you might need to communicate that this is the reason why this product, or according to this specification, this product is required. So you need a good communication skill to explain them overall why this is the best product to suit for your purpose.
So in a lot of cases, you're educating them and teaching them, especially if they're not really that experienced.
Yeah, you can say that, because then only it helps us to pass that information what we have from our end to the customer. So in future, if they come across the same situation, or if someone is trying to explain them, they would already have that some knowledge about that that product, which will help them to decide or make a decision.
In your mind, what is the most least understood and most mistake-driven area of the GridSafe? Like, is it like people saying, "Oh, no, this cable's fine," when we ask what cable you want coming into the GridSafe, and they go, "Oh, this cable," and then you go, "Hang on a sec, I've done the calculations and it's not that cable." Is that a common thing? And please explain.
Yep. So more than cable, when I started this role, it was with the circuit breakers, the selection of the circuit breakers and the derating. For example, if there was a SunGrow 110 kVA inverter, the maximum output current is around 158 or 159 amps. So customer would think, 160 amp breaker would be fine. But when they jump into the rules and regulations required according to AS 61439, then according to that, they might need a 200 amp breaker.
The 1.25
1.25 rule.
Yeah.
So they would need a 200 amp breaker. And at that time, explaining the customer why it is required or why it is important to install that according to the rule. But some of the customer might have only space of 160 amp breaker at the site, and they might have already installed the breaker in there to connect a new solar system.
The other thing I think too is where they make a mistake is they do the calculations on the breaker correctly, but then they go, "Oh, we've got 5 inverters," so they go 5 times 200, and then they have to find the next sized up breaker, when the reality is they really have to do that calculation. Well, actually, it's the same, isn't it? They still have to incorporate the 1.25 rule wherever they do it, don't they?
Yeah, so that's correct. Uh, Even if you are doing the 1.25 for the inverter breakers, the upstream breakers need to be according to that rule as well.
Of course,
Yeah.
like with like.
Yes.
Now, what about this whole thing with using a higher temperature cable, like to achieve the current carrying capacity? Because there's a few things going on with cable, isn't there? There's a current carrying capacity. There's the volt rise calculations that come into play. That's a bit of an interesting one, isn't it? Because we tend to use on our own projects 110 rated cable a lot of the time, don't we?
Yeah, because I think those cables has more capacity to carry the current and also absorb the heat from the surrounding.
Yep.
So probably at that in the more heated area, that cable might be suitable for a bit longer run or
Yep.
carrying the current which we want to based on our calculation. That's why.
For our customers and people listening who want to buy a secondary protection board, and I'm not saying necessarily from us, but from whoever, what's best practices? What kind of information do you want from the customer to make sure that there's not all this going backwards and forwards? So any sort of tricks and tips for them so they know exactly, they're giving us the right stuff right from the word go.
Okay. So yeah, there are few things to note down in that case. First is the board going to be installed indoor or outdoor? What's the requirement of the client? If the board is going outdoor, do they need aluminum or stainless steel enclosure? Second is the distributor. Who is the distributor and what are their requirements? Third one is what are the inverter sizes? The fourth one is there any generator at site? Backup generator, because you might need to turn off the PV system when the diesel generator or other generator is on.
Mm-hmm.
And the fifth one is any monitoring requirements.
Yep. That's a good point. What about like fault current ratings and stuff like that, or is that a bit more down the track?
So basically with the fault current rating, basically if there is any specific requirement of fault current rating, mentioning that would help, or else a board builder can give them the fault rating which would be provided by that board. For example, if you are looking for a 200 amp board, it comes with the default fault rating of 25 kA. But for example, if you require a higher fault rating, let's say 50 kA fault rating of that board, then if it is better to mention in that, so
Earlier
it helps.
on, yeah. And not to mention it right before we're going to deliver the board, which has happened, hasn't it? Before these things have happened.
Yeah, those things have happened a couple of times before.
What excites you personally about the future of renewables? What do you see? Yeah, is the most exciting area, that it's all going to go.
Okay, so as the industry is evolving, like probably when I started, I knew very less about how to design the system, what are the requirements, and what are the application processes for the distributors. But as the time passes, the requirements are a bit more, but that helps you learn more about how the process works and everything. So it's like the industry is evolving constantly, which helps us to develop more knowledge about this industry. So that brings more curiosity in this industry, like, oh, next year we might have some changes and we might need to go through those changes as well. So you learn more about what's required.
I agree. I also like looking at interesting applications, like we've done a floating solar project successfully, hard but successful. Personally, I'm hoping that Greenwood does a flywheel project soon, because I love flywheels, and just this whole thing about the inputs are going to come from wherever. There's going to be storage, and there's something that actually communicates with all of those things. That's incredibly important. So, what do you think? Like, if there's people out there who are, interested in renewable energy and they're electrical engineers, what's the fastest way to get involved in the Australian renewable energy industry? In addition to what you said before, but what's the one key thing that they should do? Someone who's in India now, they're contemplating moving overseas, and they say, "Hey, Australia sounds pretty good. We like eating meat pies and stuff like that." Sorry, they want to come to Australia despite the meat pies, and they're interested in renewables. What's the one thing, the first thing they should do to start that ball rolling?
Okay, the first thing which I would do if I was them would be going through the standards and requirements.
Right.
So what are the current standards according to which these systems are being designed or used in Australia, both for residential, commercial, or BESS system?
Yeah, I agree, and I think developing, and we've been talking about this, a training around various scenarios, like, for instance, a 1 megawatt system with a generator, a 1 megawatt system without a generator, domestic system with hybrid battery storage, something that energy storage with no solar for an FCAS or an arbitrage, and developing these different scenarios, these different case studies, and working on those is something that I think is really, really important and applicable anywhere in the world. Now, how do you? So you're in an engineering team, and you mentioned Anthony before, who's the head honcho of the engineering teams, for want of a better expression. Sorry, Anthony. How do you collaborate with your other engineers, or is there not as much collaboration because you're effectively the GridSafe? But then again, you collaborate with Dhruv. So what does that? How does that? What form does that take? Sorry for stumbling on that.
No, there is always a collaboration with our head of engineer and as well as Dhruv, who works with me. Basically, we have all the process set in place, which helps us work more accurately. Basically, more of like the work request. So the work request we get, we process those work and everything. And if anything urgent is required, we coordinate verbally as well. But it's more of the work request based, where we have a management software which runs through all the tasks and which helps us work more accurately. So there is a collaboration as well, but there is a work request system, management system, which helps perform us more accurately.
And can you mention what that software is?
Currently we are using Airtable for that management software, and basically it has all the stages of what we need in that software. Like probably if we are, for example, if we are having a production line of GridSafe, so it has all the process, like all the stages of GridSafe there built in there, which is suitable for our requirement.
Yeah, it seems like that's another thing too. Like when you mentioned before about what programs people should use who are interested in pursuing this area, like AutoCAD and PVSyst and HelioScope and Revit. I remember that one now. But it's also all the other software that you have to become proficient in, like a CRM and Airtable, we've tried a few of them, and they seem pretty good. And of course, there's the other ones like what is it? Cable Core? What's the one that Sam uses for the cabling? Cable Pro.
Cable Pro, yeah.
And of course, there's online programs as well. So it's a constant learning, isn't it? That's the thing. It is a constant education, using the right kind of product, making sure that you use it correctly, and learning how to use it, as well. That all takes time, doesn't it?
Yes. So when you start with working with some company, probably the softwares which I mentioned earlier, the AutoCAD, HelioScope, PVSyst, so those are the basics. But once you start working in this industry, you might come across the management softwares or other softwares which are required, basically fit for the role. So probably that might be more of the softwares which are required when you start at that workplace, or probably you might need to go through the basics of how it works, and then you might get a training on that part.
It's continuous, isn't it?
Yes.
Because I mean, most software is never is hardly ever used to its full extent. I use the case an example of something that's used by over 300, 400 million people around the world, and that's Excel. Most people use it maybe 5-10% of what it can do. And then you've got a smaller percentage who actually use it all the time and have developed, a certain level of expertise. It's just ongoing, isn't it? Now, on that note, not a touchy subject, but an interesting one because it can be both scary and fascinating. AI. What do you see? AI is. What contribution do you think AI will bring to this whole renewable energy sector? It's a hard one, I know. It's crazy what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. AI is bringing more of, probably I can say more of the management things will be done through AI, but probably it's more of software based things like commanding a battery system. Actually, I don't use AI much in my role, so probably I don't have much to say about the AI.
It's it's. I think I'll answer my own question. I think personally that people have to remember that these things are tools. AI is a hammer, like a laptop. It's a hammer, right? And if the hammer is not working, you get another hammer. And will it replace the giant brains that we have at Greenwood and other companies around the world that are involved in renewable energy? No, it won't. Will it help to maybe reduce laborious tasks? Yes. But again, at the end of the day, it's a tool, and the final say should always be with humans. Sorry, AI.
I totally agree with you, Veli, on that one, because even if you look at the answers prepared by the AI, it's the human who need to go through that and make sure if it is correct or not.
Exactly. I mean, and I've had a lot of I use AI quite a bit to generate various tasks and lists and stuff like that, which would take me for a long time, especially as I'm a horrendously slow typer because I'm old and I can only type with maybe 4 fingers if I'm lucky. But I still remember, I still remind myself that this is simply a tool. Yeah, so the cultural differences between Australia and India from the renewable energy perspective, and also the rules and regulations. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Okay. When we talk about the work culture thing, I think there is a major difference in the work culture or the way the people work, because here we have the equal, like even if even if if someone is a director, I call them by their name, whereas back in India it's like the hierarchy, probably, which also leads in making the delays in decisions. Probably when we consider back in India, if we need some decision from the director, so you might engineer might need to go to their manager will go to the director. Whereas in Australia it's more of everyone is equal, and engineer can go to director and speak. So there is a cultural difference, little bit difference in there.
Does that mean there's more time taken between the idea and the actual execution?
Yeah, that's what I exactly meant.
Yeah.
That the execution time is bit more. Now, when we talk about the regulation, so there are four key differences in regulations. Like first is energy regulations. So in India, it is been governed by central and state level bodies, whereas in Australia, it is highly structured and strong state regulatory from AEMO and AER.
But in India, do they have the equivalent of AMO and AER?
Now, those are run by the central and the state government based on their regulations.
Oh, it's totally government run.
Government run, yeah.
And the DNSPs, what's the equivalent of those in India?
I think so. The government is the distributor, and then there are other retailers
Right.
throughout. Yeah, like probably when we consider in Australia, so you have AusNet, and then there are different retailers like AGL, Origin, etc. Similarly, government is the distributor there, and then the retailers are like Tata or Reliance or.
So so it sounds really because there'd be more red tape in India than in Australia for getting things done because there's more processes you'd have to go through. Maybe is that right or not?
Yes, there would be a bit more processes, so that arise to the more of compliance burden as well as renewable policies. So when talking about the renewable policies, India has the target driven by the nation mission, which
Yep.
is run by the government, whereas considering in Australia, it is market based mechanism for renewable.
But we still have some goals that the government needs to hit. But the market, it is the market really
Market driven mechanism.
that drives everything. So would that mean is it harder to do things than in India than Australia now, or is it more just different?
I think it's just different because the current government has the target of reaching somewhere, so it is a bit more easier. But if the government changes and the government is not focused on renewables, or they don't want to meet those targets, or they want to slow down on those targets, then it might differ in that case.
And I'll be careful here, but India was under English rule for a very long time, and England is very bureaucratic, and this is why that bureaucracy is still in place in India when it comes to doing these things.
Yes, and also there is a compliance burden, more of like bureaucratic, and it is often complex to get the approval. Whereas when we consider the Australian standard, so they have the streamlined processes and the process is transparent.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, whereas back in India, it is bit complex.
It's a bit muddy, is it?
Yeah,
Okay. And with the standards, like we follow, in most cases, Australian standards and occasionally IEEC, is it? I think the international standards. What standards do India follow when it comes to all of this electrical stuff?
yep. So India follows IS standard.
IS.
Yeah, but it is improving, but it is inconsistent in regards to the safety standard.
Is safety not as I mean, one of the reasons why safety is so important in Australia is that we had it in the early 70s, the highest rate of industrial deaths in the Western world. It was horrendous, and then they started clamping down. So, is the safety in India isn't as important at this point in time as compared to Australia, you would say?
Yeah, definitely, because Australia, here the safety is the priority,
Yeah.
because we have some certain rules of occupational health and safety, whereas it's bit inconsistent in India.
And that's something definitely that has to be brought up, and that'll happen through training and stuff like that, and education, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what country you're from, you really want to go home to your loved ones at the end of the day, and that's all about the OH&S. So what do you think is what's going to be happening in India? What's right now? You know, you're Indian. You're living in Australia. You've been involved in renewable energy. You've seen the Australian market. What's happened over the last quite a few years? What's your prediction for the India? What are we going to see in India in the next couple of years, in your mind?
Yeah, so probably same as the trend which was followed by Australia. Like probably there will be a more and more installations going on for rooftop solar as well as the commercial solar, but also there will be some of the renewable policies which will be made more simple, the process would be quicker, as well as the safety standards and everything would increase. So the level of security would increase, but there will be more and more opportunities, or people might be people might need more and more training regarding how this safety as well as the designs and engineering or the installation work needs to be done. So the knowledge required to do these things will be more essential, and so the more of the companies might need to focus on the training factor. Yeah.
So, and this is not training not just for electrical engineer. This is training for electricians and apprentices. And do they have a similar? I'm not sure if you know the answer to this question, but do they have a similar apprentice electrician scheme like they do in Australia, or do you just train and then become an electrician without being an apprentice first?
I think so. It's more of a training factor. So there is a major difference of how the installer is built through apprentice for 4 years in Australia, whereas in India it's more of a training based.
So that's really interesting because, you know, in some countries you can actually wire up your house legally. I believe it still may be the case. I believe it still may be the case in England. I may be wrong on that, but I seem to remember that you can, if it's your own house, wire it up. Obviously, again, it all comes back to training, experience, and doing things correctly, processes and procedures. What other things are there that would be applicable that are of interest to our listeners?
Other things would be an organization who has the experience of doing this installation as well as designing. For example, if a company who is giving a training, they are more of sharing the knowledge but not the practical experience. So if there would be a company who has the record of designing, installing, and passing through the knowledge through training, would be very helpful in this case, because what would happen is the person who is getting the training would get the insight or a case study which completely has the information of what went right and what went wrong in the design, what went right, what went wrong in the installation, and as well as passing the knowledge completely from the start of the project to the end of the project.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we talked about this off camera about if you're just learning things theoretically without actually doing the practical side or knowing how the practical side will go, it's not the most effective training. I mean, you'll still get trained, but you really need that complete training to inspire confidence. And at the end of the day, we are talking electricity, and that's always been my thing. It's scary stuff, and it can kill you. It sounds like the whole Indian renewable energy sector it's exciting. It's early days, and people are enthusiastic, and hopefully they don't go through and make the same mistakes that we did in Australia. There's a lot of things we could have done better, and hopefully they learn from us in that respect. So this is really interesting. You know, before we started this podcast, you sent me that podcast, that Indian podcast on Indian solar, and I had a quick look. I didn't look through the whole lot. I will eventually, but I was just blown away by just the sheer scale and the potential of this amazing country with these amazing people, and the fact that renewable is perfect. It's more perfect actually for India than Australia, because it's just you got a perfect environment for it, and it's going to be really exciting to see what happens next. Is there any other things that in that respect from an education perspective?
I think so. That would be it from the education perspective.
We've talked for a very long time. Have you got any personal mission or motto that you live your life by? Like, you know, is Is there something that you've always held near and dear to your heart, like a particular saying or a particular thought, like a personal perspective about, life in general?
Yeah. So it's like I always have thought that nothing would come easy. So I need to work hard on getting something. So it's not the luck factor, it's the hard factor which works for me.
I totally agree. It's all about the effort, and the results will come when they do. Yeah. Look, on that note, I think we'll finish. I've had a great time. I knew I would. We've spoken for we've spoken for a very long time. I won't say how long. It's been amazing having you here, and I've learned a lot, not only about your personal journey, but also how you view things, what's happening in India, and your role in Greenwood. So, yeah, thanks very much, Jayesh.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for inviting me, Velito.
My pleasure, mate. Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.